Choosing your first synth is a bit like choosing your first car. You might be a little tight on the budget, but you still want to make sure you get something that fits your needs and that you'll get the most mileage out of. But with all the possible choices available, it's pretty easy to get lost in the circuitry. This is why we thought it could be a good idea to create a guide breaking down different types of synthesis and synthesizers to help you find your dream synth. So buckle up, because we're taking a deep dive into the magical universe of synthesizers. First, a bit of history. Even though Robert Moog and Don Buchla are widely credited for developing and commercializing the first modern synthesizers in the mid-60s, pioneers such as Leo Theremin and Maurice Martineau had already developed electronic musical instruments as early as 1920 with the Theremin and 1921 for the Ondes Martineau, an electronic instrument that used both a keyboard to play temperate tones and a ribbon system to glide between notes. Another popular example of an early electronic instrument that's still widely used today is the Hammond organ, which was invented in 1937. The first programmable electronic synthesizer, however, the massive RCA Mark II, was built by Columbia University in 1957 and features the building blocks of modern synths, including 12 voltage control oscillators, or VCOs, and a noise generator. The first commercially available synth came around in 1965 and was Robert Moog's Modular Synthesizer, a behemoth both in terms of size and price, while at the same time, Don Buchla, another major synth pioneer, was developing an instrument that aimed to offer the user a virtually limitless freedom in creating sounds. The mid-60s is also when the terms East Coast and West Coast theories first emerged. To put it simply, the East Coast school of thought is based on subtractive synthesis, a method that uses different filters and devices to subtract frequencies from a tone to shape it. West Coast synthesis, on the other hand, revolves around additive synthesis, wave shaping and frequency modulation to create complex sounds. The next major evolution in the synth world happened in 1970 when Bob Moog and Bill Hemseth created the first portable monophonic synth, the Mini Moog. The Mini Moog was a revolution both in terms of size and in terms of price. More affordable than the gigantic Moog modular, the Mini Moog could also be easily brought to the stage and the studio, and for the first time, musicians were able to have a synth at home. The bedroom producer was born. The advent of the Mini Moog inspired other manufacturers to produce their own personal synths, and companies like Roland, Korg, and Sequential Circuits began creating all kinds of synths, some of which achieved the status of icons, heralding the golden age of synthesizers. The digital revolution also had an important impact on the evolutions of synths, with the creation of instruments like the Fairlight CMI, and in 1983, Yamaha released one of the most controversial digital synths of all time, the DX7. From there, the race was on, and a plethora of mythical synths, analog, digital, or both, saw the light of day, while the barrier of entry to purchase one kept getting lower. In 2025, buying a synth is more accessible and affordable than ever, whether you'd like to go with a synth from a legacy manufacturer or one by a more recent player in the game. That's it for this quick history of synth. Now let's take a look at what's out there. At this point, you already heard me throw around a few terms like analog, digital, and monophonic. And if you're asking yourself what I mean by all that, well, fret not, because in this segment, we're going to demystify these terms and go over a bit of general synth terminology. The key component of any synth, the sound generator, is the oscillator. Oscillators can generate multiple waveforms such as sine wave, sawtooth, pulse wave, and more. The filter is a circuit that can gradually remove frequencies from a tone. The three more common types of filters are low pass, which filters out high frequencies, high pass, which filters out low frequencies, and band pass, which excludes frequencies outside of a specific band. You'll also hear me use the terms amp envelope and filter envelope. The amplitude envelope generator uses the synth internal amp to shape the signal with four main controls: attack, decay, sustain, and release, ADSR. Attack refers to the time it takes for the note to reach its full amplitude. It can be very quick or slow. Decay refers to the time it takes to the signal to get to the level of sustain, which is the volume of the note when it's held. And lastly, release refers to the time it takes for the note to fade out when the note is released. The same principle is applied to the filter with a filter envelope, which can be used to automate filter behaviors to keep your hands free while you're playing. LFOs, or low-frequency oscillators, are a different type of oscillator that use inaudible frequencies to modulate and control synth components like the filter or the pitch of an oscillator. Polyphony is another important term. Polyphony refers to the number of voices a synth has. In simple terms, a voice is the complete signal path used to create a sound. This means that each voice has at least one oscillator, one amp envelope, and one filter envelope. As their name implies, monosynths only have one voice, making them great for bass sounds and melodic leads, for instance. A great example of a famous monosynth is the Minimoog Model D, which I mentioned earlier, as well as the Korg MS-20. Polyphonic synths have multiple voices and use stacked oscillators and envelope generators to play multiple notes and chords. Before I move on, there is an in-between though, paraphonic synths. These synths have multiple oscillators so they can play chords, but these notes all share the same amp and filter envelopes, so these synths are limited in their ability to generate layered chords like true polysynths. The other major distinction in the synth universe is analog versus digital. Analog synths use analog circuits and components like resistors and transistors to generate a constant waveform, so what you're hearing is actual voltage going through these components and circuits. That's also why most components have the word voltage included in them. For instance, voltage-controlled oscillator or voltage-controlled filter. These synths use voltage fluctuation to affect pitch or timbre, for instance, and are traditionally very hands-on with all the main controls on the front panel. And because they generate and process their signal entirely in the analog realm, the resulting sound is often referred to as warm and organic. The drawback is that they are more susceptible to wear and tear than their digital counterparts, and that the years and temperature can affect both the tuning of the oscillators and the sound quality of the synth overall, though some say that that's what gives them their unique character and sound. Digital synths, on the other hand, use binary language, chips and circuit boards, and more recently digital signal processing algorithms for sound generation. To simplify things a lot, binary language is made of only two values, 1 or 0, on or off. So when you press a key on a digital synth, it generates a sound wave that looks like an analog signal from a distance, perfectly continuous and smooth, But if you zoom in very closely on it, you'll notice that the curve begins to look like stairs. Remember, ones and zeros, ons and offs, which happen so fast, we're talking 10,000s of times per second, that our ears cannot perceive the offs. This is akin to the principle of the analog to digital conversion process, during which a digital interface breaks down the audio signal into infinitely small digital bits, resulting in a staircase-looking sound wave instead of a perfectly smooth curve. This is of course just the base principle, and modern digital synths use an intricate network of chips, processors, and software algorithms, which gives them amazing flexibility when it comes to sound generation and quasi-software synth capabilities for some. They can emulate pretty much any analog synths, old or new, and some of their components, like different types of filters for instance, but they can also generate more complex waveforms and wavetables that analog synths can produce. And they often have more voices of polyphony than their analog counterparts, since voice generation relies more on processing power than on hardware components. The drawback is that because digital synths rely on chips and computer processing instead of circuitry, their sound is often described as cold or colder than the one of analog synths. But honestly, I think that's a matter of taste, and I personally think that digital synths can sound incredible. Hybrid synths give you the best of both worlds while also retaining some of the limitations of analog and digital synths. These synths have both analog circuits and digital components in their signal path, like the Nina by Melbourne Instruments for instance, which has both analog and digital oscillators, an analog filter, and a digital effect bus. The analog-digital hybrid approach allows this synth to harness the power of digital technology while retaining the warmth of analog circuits. Semi-modular synths like the legendary Korg MS-20 or the Moog Labyrinth have a wired architecture that can be modified by rewiring the internal components with patch points on the front panel via the use of patch cables, giving them more flexibility than integrated design synths, which have a closed architecture. They can also be easily integrated with fully modular setups. Full-fledged modular synths use individual components called modules, and this system allows the user to create completely unique systems tailored to their needs. But user beware, once you go down the modular rabbit hole, you might never come out of it. Like semi-modular synths, modular systems use patch cable to connect different modules and create a signal path from sound generation to output. Last but not least, you can ditch the hardware completely and opt for a software synth. Unlike hardware synth, the only limitation of soft synths is the processing power of the computer they're running on. Other than that, soft synths can do it all. Whether it's replicating the sound of famous and expensive vintage synths like the high-quality recreations of the Arturia V collection, or creating completely new sounds with VSTs like Massive by Native Instruments or Pigments by Arturia, software synths are an incredibly powerful and cheap alternative to hardware and are definitely something to consider if you're trying to get into synthesis but lack the budget to invest in a real-life instrument. Now let's talk about things you'll definitely want to consider before choosing your first synth, and budget will probably be one of the first. Synthesizers can easily run in the thousands of dollars, but luckily for the budget-conscious bedroom producer, these days there are a lot of great options even under the $500 threshold. Polyphony is also going to be an important one. If you're just looking to play bass lines or leads, then a mono synth is probably the right choice for you. But if you intend to play chords, then you should look into getting a polysynth. Unfortunately, more polyphony usually also means more budget, but once again, there are more and more entry-level options out there for polysynths, and digital synths offer more voices of polyphony for less of your hard-earned dollars. Many of us these days want to just have a plug-and-play machine that we can just turn on and jam on. And luckily, many modern synths come with a long list of preloaded presets. And that's not just digital synths. Many analog synths can also store and recall presets, and some, like the Nina by Melbourne Instruments, even have motorized knobs that display the position of each parameter of the synth in real time. Some synths though cannot store presets, so you have to use patch sheets or just start from scratch each time you turn them on. Don't dismiss these synths though. Some of them are legendary instruments, and you'll find out very early on in your synth journey that creating your own patches or tweaking presets to make them unique is a big part of the joy of playing a synth. Another thing you'll want to consider is studio space. A lot of manufacturers release two versions of the same synth. An integrated design version that includes a keyboard and a rack mount desktop version that ditches the keys and only features the brain of the machine and which you can control with an external MIDI controller. To show you an example of this, here is the Korg Multi-Poly and here is the rack mount version of the same unit. Rack mount synth can be a huge space saver, which means more space for other synths. I mean, that sounds like a win-win to me. Portability can also be a key factor to consider when choosing your instrument. Are you planning to gig a lot with your synth? In that case, you might want to opt for something that you can easily carry around. If your synth is going to live in your studio, then size and weight might be less of an issue. Unless, of course, you live like in a tiny New York apartment like me, in which case you're probably going to have to compromise on that as well. Pocket-sized synths are also very popular these days, and it's never been easier to take your music creation platform with you. And they come in every flavor: analog, digital, mono, poly, and even semi-modular. Some higher-end ones even fit a full recording studio into pocket-sized units. So if you've kept up with the latest development in music technology, you've probably heard or read the term MP, which stands for MIDI Polyphonic Expression. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface and is a computer language used by virtually all synths, controllers, and DAWs to send, share, and receive musical information. So for instance, when I play a melody on this MIDI controller, the DAW receives all sorts of information relative to my performance, such as pitch, note velocity, note length, but also pitch bend or modulation. Though seemingly simple, MIDI can capture the expressivity of a performer in great detail and render that performance with equal precision. MIDI is also used to control DAW or instrument parameters with control changes or CC messages. A classic example would be, for example, for the sustain pedal, which is mapped to CC64. Similarly, the modulation wheel of any synth or controller is always mapped to CC number 1. And to keep things organized, MIDI uses a system of channels to control different devices or virtual instruments at the same time. So you can have different synths mapped to their own MIDI channel and control them all from a single controller by simply switching the channel. Now back to MP, which is an extension of the MIDI protocol, which lets you control multiple parameters such as volume, pitch, and timbre on a per-note basis. In a nutshell, with MP, each note gets its own MIDI channel and can be controlled independently from other notes played at the same time. MP is increasingly implemented by manufacturers into their synths and is an incredibly powerful tool when it comes to unleash a synth expressivity. Notable examples of MP-capable synths are the Osmose by Expressive E and the Polybrute 12 by Arturia. Other synths do not feature an MP-enabled keyboard, but are nonetheless MP-compatible and can be controlled with an MP controller. Now that we've covered all the basic knowledge you should need, let's take a look at a few synths in each category. If you're looking for a great mono synth under $500, I think the Bass Station 2 by Novation is a great place to start. This fully analog synth has two multi-shape oscillators and a third tunable sub-oscillator, two filters, two LFOs, and 3 envelope generators. In other words, it's a fully equipped analog mono synth that sounds terrific, and it can save presets. Another great mono synth to check out is the Moog Messenger, which features oscillators with continuous wave shaping, a new twist on the legendary Moog ladder filter, and will bring the Moog sound to your studio without breaking the bank. If you're looking for a killer analog polysynth under $600, then you should definitely check out the Nymphs by Dreadbox. With 6 voices of analog polyphony, 1 amp envelope, 1 filter envelope, and 1 LFO per voice, plus a second assignable LFO, an onboard digital reverb, 49 factory presets, and 49 slots for your own patches, this little synth can pretty much do it all. With 5 voices of polyphony, the Oberheim TO5 gives you that classic analog sound and feel without having to sell an organ for it. In the digital realm, the Mini Freak by Arturia definitely stands out. With 6 voices of polyphony, 22 types of synthesis, a super flexible mod matrix, and a software version of the synth included with the hardware, you get a very flexible machine for a very reasonable price. A great example of a fully digital synth is the Korg Multi-Poly, which features both virtual analog technology, wavetable and waveshaper oscillators, and next-gen model legacy filters, including an MS-20 and a mini Korg-inspired filter. Now let's talk about pocket synths for a second. With the miniaturization of technology, synths have shrunken, and what once required a full room can fit in the inside pocket of your coat. And portable synths have a lot going for them, packing a ton of fun and powerful features in a small footprint enclosure. And yes, they come in every type. In search of a travel-size analog mono or polysynth, look no further than the Korg Volca Nubase or the Volca Keys. Need a 303 bassline style synth or a sample-based drum machine? Check out the Roland Era Compact T8 and P6. For those looking for a powerful polysynth that fits in the palm of the hand, I would recommend the colorful Nanobox series by 1010 Music. Now don't be fooled by the small size of these units, because under each of these cute little enclosures lives a different synthesis monster, with a granular synth, a wavetable synth, a streaming sampler, and an FM drum sequencer. All of them feature tons of presets and samples for instant inspiration and jams, fully tweakable controls, and a touchscreen for menu navigation, parameter controls, or just to play the synth without an external controller. And if you're looking for a unit that can do it all, I highly recommend checking out the incredible OP1 Field or the OPXY by Teenage Engineering. In any case, if you want to bring your music production with you wherever you go, options are not lacking. Giving advice on what to choose for a modular setup is a bit trickier because of the nature of the beast. There are literally thousands of modules to choose from, and I think we'll have to have a dedicated video for this. But a good place to start if you'd like to venture in the universe of modular synth is with a semi-modular system. Semi-modular synths have a wired architecture that can be bypassed and reconfigured using patch points. Some systems, like the Moog Mother series or the Pittsburgh Modular Taiga, use physical patch points and patch cables to achieve this. Others, like the Arturia Polybrute, use a button-based mod matrix. Regardless of which system they use, semi-modular can be integrated and used with fully modular setups. If money is not an issue, then you might want to start looking at flagship synths. You know, those dream machines with all the bells and whistles.
Okay, the video.
Oh, sorry. I dreamed for a second. Once again, there are no shortages of options here. At the top of my list is the Arturia Polybrute 12, an incredible analog synth with 12 voices of polyphony, an MP-enabled keyboard, and other performance tools like the touche and the ribbon, which lets you create and perform absolutely incredible sounds. Another one of my favorite synths is the Nina by Melbourne Instruments. On top of being an incredible analog polysynth with 12 voices of polyphony, with 2 analog oscillators, a third wavetable digital oscillator per voice, and an incredible sounding filter, among other things, the Nina has a fully motorized control surface that recalls and shows each parameter values in real time. Let's finish with a quick look at software synths. Once again here, options are many and your choice will really depend on what you're looking for. If you like emulations of classic synths, the Arturia V Collection is a great place to start, with faithful recreations of the vintage synths that made their mark in music history. Most legacy synth brands like Korg or Moog also have great software versions of their vintage instruments. Now, if you want a do-it-all modern software synth, Pigment 6 by Arturia combines every known types of synthesis into one intuitive virtual instrument and can create literally any sound you can imagine. Before we wrap this up, here are a few last tips to help you make your choice. The first, and maybe the most important, is, if possible, try before you buy. Now, of course, there are plenty of videos online on every possible synth out there, and you should absolutely use that resource in your search. But I guarantee you that watching 100 videos will never replace the hands-on experience of tasting a synth in real life, since part of the fun of synths is the interaction you get with the knobs, keys, and buttons of the instrument. And if you're in New York, I don't know, I highly recommend you come try out one of the many great synths we have on display here at the B&H store. The second thing to remember is think long-term. Remember the bad car analogy from the very top of this video? Well, this is when getting the most mileage out of your synth comes into play. Chances are that if you're looking into buying a synth, you'll want to add it to your setup for the foreseeable future. So if you are 100% sure that you'll stick to basses and leads, then just get a mono synth, no brainer. But if you think that you might want to use your synth for chords, you might want to invest straight off the bat into a few more voices of polyphony and get a polysynth. The style of music you want to create or play might also dictate your choice, so try finding out what hardware your favorite artists are using in their tracks, and it will probably tell you what you should get to achieve the sound you want. This ties in well with one last piece of advice. Pick a synth that inspires you. I remember the first time I laid hands on a Minimoog Model D, and that feeling was what made me want to discover and try out other synths. Now I know that a Model D is typically not what you'd go for as a first synth, but through testing, I've discovered that there are so many entry-level synths that have the same magic in them. And with this, we come to the end of our synth journey together and to the beginning of yours. If you're lost in the noise, I hope this video gave you some clarity and some trails to explore to help you choose your first synth. And if you already know what your dream synth is, please let me know in the comments below. If you want to learn more about specific synthesizers, check our synth review playlist for a growing collection of deep dive synth reviews of some of the best units on the market. Last but not least, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for more music tech content. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, this was Gabe with the B&H Pro YouTube channel, where sound matters.